Hello.
Hi, I'm gonna turn my volume up.
Oh, Facebook. Just when we think we know it, it changes.
Right? I the new layout is so confusing to me because I have like multiple business pages on there and it just everything's so different now.
Yeah, so true. So how are you tonight? Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, no, I'm really good. I'm like super stoked to have this night with you and then also just in general and we bought a house, big things are happening. My online store is becoming a brick and mortar, so I'm super excited.
That's
Everything is
awesome.
going really well. Yeah, I couldn't after the years that we've had, I could use this.
Yep, absolutely. Where's the store going to be?
So it's in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. It's actually going to be in the in-law suite of our house.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, I'm going to do by appointment basis only at first, and then see where that goes. I do have kids, so I can't be there all day long. But
Right.
I'm really, really excited. I just bought fixtures for it tonight, so I'm like, it seems more real every day.
That is awesome. I'm really happy for you.
Good. I want to make sure that I'm like in view because this is what happened with Matt before. I apparently had my head cut off last time, but am I okay?
You're okay. His top knot is a little bit, to the top, but you're doing good.
Is that better?
I'm holding my phone because I was not prepared. So, next time I'll know it has to be on a mobile device.
Yeah, I wish I remembered that. I think that's what happened with Matt, but we weren't sure if it was just like his computer or just like I completely spaced on that. Otherwise, I would have been like, hey, by the way, let's prepare this a little bit better.
No worries.
All right, so I want to we'll jump right in. So tonight's discussion is okay. So since someone just asked that too, so tonight's discussion is about the shadow self and shadow work. Um, my friend and I, Amy, we came up with some questions last night.
Oh, cool.
So we can make it pretty smooth and simple. So first things first, I want you to introduce yourself. I know you're Christopher Penczak, but you have a
Um,
little bio blurb.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm best known for the Temple of Witchcraft series of books, and I'm the co-founder of the Temple of Witchcraft nonprofit. I've got about 26 books out, and the latest one was called The Casting of Spells. And I do a lot of healing work and ritual work and teaching work, primarily in New England, so we're not too far from each other.
Yep, yep. All right. So I do know. So before, actually, we'll wait to the end for that because that's going to be a question I know people are going to be asking. So we'll just jump right into this. So, what is your idea and definition of the shadow self?
It is the part of us that absorbs a lot of what we repress or are unconscious of. And that part of our magical process is how do we bring that into consciousness and partner with it actively.
I have music playing on my Alexa, but it's so loud. So, 1 minute, please. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
There we go.
No, absolutely. And something that I started offering earlier this year uh, is a shadow reading, which is on my website. It says exactly that and what the shadow self is and how to do it. The reading is not necessarily shadow work, but it's done so in a way to get people who are in the reading to think about these things of the shadow self and think basically as a starting point. So this is what intuitively I'm picking up on that maybe these are the things that you should work through when you do your shadow work. And
Hmm.
then that brings me into the second one. Actually, it's a common misconception that the shadow self is like a negative something, and like you said, we repress. But I think this kind of deters people away from even wanting to think about doing shadow work because they're not sure what to expect when they do it. They don't know what kind of emotions they're going to be dealing with, kind of feelings they're going to be dealing with. So I just wanted to see like if you could shed some light on what to expect when you start working with shadow self, what kind of feelings and emotions that you should be aware of that it's working and that it's not that's supposed to happen and vice versa.
Yeah, I don't even define it as something negative. Just because something's unconscious doesn't mean it's, and I don't define negative as bad, but it doesn't always have to be difficult. I think sometimes when you do shadow work, you actually discover some gifts you have that you don't want to own either. So anything you don't want to own kind of goes into the shadow, and even the things you're good at, or the things that you really could embrace about yourself. So I think sometimes some really wonderful gifts come out of it. So I think that's a good thing for people to remember. I do think it's emotionally intense, and I don't want to hide that from people, but I think one of the things a lot of my students, we have a 5-year program, and we do a lot of shadow work in the 3rd year. And before that, people hear all the rumors of, what the 3rd year is like, and they get scared and they get nervous, and
Oh, yeah.
people who often think it's going to be super easy have the hard time with it. And the people who are like, oh, I'm really prepared for it, I think it's going to be hard. We're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And I had a teacher who described it as like lifting up the rock, and there might be creepy crawly things underneath the rock, but you don't know till you lift it up. But the first time you lift it up is the scariest. And then after that, you sort of understand what the process is because it's known. I think just being unknown is what's scary and tough for people. But I think we're always doing shadow work if we're alive. Like, I think, it's very rare for a person to totally repress everything all the time. I think anytime you have to hear feedback that's tough, or you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, I think that's the start of shadow work. And I think when we talk about it magically, it's just a lot deeper. But I think we're doing it all the time. So I think it's a part of life. And I try to just tell people this is just a part of life, and we're going to ritualize it and, go towards it.
Yeah, I think it also helps bring people truly to center with themselves, because instead of isolating or repressing or, pushing it away, it's eventually gonna like bubble up, boil up, or be so repressed down that they lose that sense of themselves, or that they're in denial. As I think is the key word too. A lot of times there's a lot of denial because oh, this isn't my thing, like, or even like bad habits and things get shoved into the shadow self. And I
Right.
feel like if you don't embrace it, you can't be fully authentically yourself, because at some point you're kind of putting on a facade and okay, or just not embracing who you are in totality, and then in doing that you are missing something. And like you said, some people discover gifts in doing it. So
Mm.
really, I think people should be embracing that. And then that brings us into the next one, is how do you recognize when you should start to do shadow work? Or is there something that you feel like, oh, like I need to work on my shadow self now, like if it's something that's ongoing?
I think for people who are practicing magicians and witches who've done a lot of introspection work, I think when you come across a problem that you can't solve, often we're holding back in something. So that might be a time to do a deeper level of shadow work, or if there's, like you said, with a habit, or some type of coping mechanism that you realize is a coping mechanism and you want to change it and you can't easily, then usually there's something deeper there to dig into it. If someone's new to all this, I usually don't tell them to start out with shadow work, but I'll say really do introspective work. So start
Hmm.
with the journaling, start with meditation, really just try to get to know yourself and your spirituality on a basic level. And then that'll lead to shadow work. It's no need to rush it. But I think sometimes people get excited, and a lot of people are enamored by kind of the dark and spooky image of the witch right now, so they want to dive right into what's going to be the darkest, scariest thing. And they're like, oh, wow, this is real. So I'm always like, it might seem a little boring, but, take some time to sit in front of the altar, light a candle, do, basic kind of meditation, mindfulness and journaling type of stuff. And that'll lead to the shadow work.
So when someone is new to the idea of it, and they're doing meditation, what kind of things can they expect or look for? Because I know some people who maybe not even familiar or usually doing meditation, that they don't know what they're looking for. So if their intention is to be introspective, but if they're doing meditation and the whole time they're focusing on just being still in anything, how would they know when they're ready to transition, or what can they expect in doing those meditations? Like, what should they be journaling?
I always tell people to journal whatever's going on in their life. And to start out, I kind of borrow from Julia Cameron's The Artist Way, and talk about doing three pages, your morning pages or evening pages, whatever
Mhm.
you want to call them, a day. And I don't think if you do that honestly, I don't think you cannot dig up stuff, because it's hard to write 3 pages a day, which is why we have you
Yeah.
do it. And then once you've gotten into that pretty far, you might not have to do 3 pages. You might just write, what comes up for you in that moment, and they might be shorter entries and longer entries. I'm a big believer in consciousness and looking at your patterns of consciousness and your motivations and witnessing yourself. And I think what opens the door to shadow work is when you start to experience emotions and behaviors that you can't really recognize where they're coming from. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really a call to go deeper and try to find where the root of that is. Like for me, it was about anger, so I thought I was very spiritual and very wonderful and, all the things that we like to convince ourselves we are. And then I started to experience some anger. And the level of anger for the situation was disproportionate because I've been repressing anger. So to realize, okay, there's something wrong here, and my basic meditation's not handling it. How do I go deeper? How do I heal this?
Um, I lost my train of thought. It was something that had to do with journaling. I noticed too when I was journaling for Witchcraft One, uh, the 3 pages a day. And this, okay, so this is what I want to say. Now I remember. So some things for everyone watching. A little advice on the journaling is to write in your journal like no one's going to see it. I
Right.
think a lot of people will write it, they'll start to be authentic, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like what if someone finds it, or what if, like God forbid something happens to me and they're going through my stuff and they like learn these dark secrets or these truths, or like they find out how I was feeling about them or my situation or anything like that. Um, but honestly, the whole point of it is to do it for yourself. It's not for anyone else. It's not for any other readers. And I found myself doing that a lot when I first started doing journaling, is that I was writing it about my day and journaling and how I was feeling, but how I was feeling in terms of how I wanted people to think I was feeling. So it
Right.
was almost like I was putting in the work and getting nowhere with it. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, like I wrote that, but like deep down, like it made me want to like strangle somebody. Like I wasn't handling it okay, and I had to be like open and honest with myself about that. And it wasn't until I did that that I started getting what I would consider like the breakthroughs, and and I feel like that was what really opened it up, because and I find this too is that when we don't reach that breakthrough, or if we don't kind of have that authenticity, we may find ourselves stuck in like this conundrum of bad luck. Not always,
Hmm.
but I feel like we get
Well, I think
stuck in this like tumbleweed.
I think the shadow also has a certain level of power, and if you're not working with it consciously, it reacts to get your attention. So I think it
Yeah.
can be that bad luck, or it can be that misfortune, or whatever happens because it's trying to get, hey, I'm over here. I think you're absolutely right with the journal. One of the things I tell people, and this sounds super morbid, but I don't, we have to embrace death as we embrace life. If you have a will or you have any type of last wishes, we
Yeah.
often want to include as magical people what to do with our magical items. And I have in mind, here's where my journal is, so everybody can find it. And I don't want it opened. And if I should die before taking care of this, I want it burned. So in my mind, I'm totally free to write whatever I want
Yeah.
in it. And I
Yeah.
trust the people in my life. If I say I don't want them to read something, they won't do it just out of curiosity.
I'm not crying. I just this ring light is burning my eyeball.
Oh no.
And then I do this often in lives. My apologies, people. Okay. Um, what would you say or consider to be shadow work? So we kind of talked about like basically pre-gaming to get to that point,
Mhm.
but what would you consider to be shadow work? So say someone's ready, or they've been doing that for a while now, and they had that little bit of a breakthrough, and they're like, all right, now I'm ready to go like deeper and dive in deeper, whether they're practitioners or just spiritual people. What's something that they could do?
So for me, shadow work has really got at least two basic parts to it. On one level, it's really about getting to that place of consciousness about whatever is repressed. So like in the classes that I teach, we do what's called a shadow journal, which is close to what people call bullet journaling, or
Hmm.
kind of a brainstorming, but on specific what people would consider to be negative or bad emotions, on anger and fear and jealousy and shame. And you can add your own kind of hot button emotion for it. And just kind of dredging it up in an honest way, which is why we usually ask for 2 years of journaling before that, so you can really kind of understand that process of being honest with yourself. But then from a magical perspective, which I think is hard to talk about if someone's not ritualistic in any way, or meditative, is to conjure the literal entity of the shadow through ritual and have a conversation with it and commune with it and empathize with it and understand where it's coming from. And like the shamans of old, like the witches making contracts and pacts, make an agreement with it. So to say, I recognize this pain, I recognize I've put this upon you. Because I think in essence, like in our psychic makeup, the shadow, the part of us that becomes the shadow, is neutral. It can absorb, and so it takes on a lot of stuff, and because we live in an unhealthy society, we ask it to take on a lot of stuff. But I don't think it has anything inherently good or bad about it. It's very neutral. So it's about asking it, like saying, I recognize I put this burden on you. I would like to start taking this burden off of you. All the power that you've absorbed through this process, how can we work together for our mutual benefit, and start partnering with the shadow? And then I think once you do that, you go through phases where the shadow really, you integrate it. And then just when you think like, oh, I'm done with shadow work, I think that's super great, and I'm super aware, then it kind of splits off apart, and you have another shadow work round, and then you refine it in a deeper, more intense level, and then you integrate it again, and then it splits off again, and then you integrate it again, and it's this kind of constant process of dissolve and coagulate, this constant process of separate and reunite. And I think that's the beauty of it. But every time we think we're done, I think we're fooling ourselves. As long as you have a body, I think you have a shadow.
Yeah, exactly. So this one was from my friend Amy. Her question was, how can you differentiate between the self and the shadow self?
Oh, that is
I think
such a great
we
question.
kind of already like touched base on that, but I know we didn't kind of like straight to the point answer that. So I think it's more so like
Well, we could spend all night on that, because I don't know if I believe in a distinct self.
exactly.
I definitely come from a three soul model. I like to tell people, you start the life with three souls or three selves, with options to buy or make more. I often am enamored by the Egyptian cosmology of the 9 souls, but I think we've got many selves, just like we've got many parts to our body, and they're all us. And I think the shadow is one of them. So I think the shadow is the part of us that's receptive and takes on what's repressed or what's unconscious. But I think it's not necessarily the psychological unconsciousness. We sometimes relate that in witchcraft and metaphysics to the lower self. I think it's connected to the lower self, but it's also separate from the lower self. So I think we have multiple selves going on, and kind of what our job, if there's an ultimate self, or what some people call the higher self, is to sort of be the team leader. I need to get all my selves kind of moving in the right direction, working together. And I think sometimes the shadow self is the, I don't want to say troublemaker, because it's not intentionally so, but I think everybody can kind of be going the same way except for the shadow self. And if the shadow self's not going that way, you got to get in the team. You have to have it buy into the team, or the team has to change its goals to integrate what the shadow wants as well. Because I think unless you have all the parts kind of on board, it's hard to accomplish too much.
Yeah, and I think like we as humans just walking around doing our day-to-day tasks, we carry different versions of ourselves. So why not inners being different too? We're not the same person we are at work as we are at home or with our best friends. So why should our souls or our soul makeup be any different? Um, Something I was thinking of with the shadow self. So if say someone, like you said, it kind of you reintegrate and then it splits off again. So say someone's done shadow work, they're feeling a lot better. They're kind of like feeling like, okay, like I did my thing, like I'm good for now. So if they're feeling good for now and they feel like they really like lifted themselves up and they feel, lighter, brighter, um, is there any advice that you could think of? So if they're going about their day, things to do it so that they're not instantly absorbing it and adding to it right away. So are there tactics and ways that I'm thinking like this is probably more psychological than anything is how can someone prepare themselves for something to come their way and to handle it as it comes so that way they don't have to have that absorbed and then have to deal with it later. How can they deal with it now?
I think for me, the thing that's been most helpful but doesn't change the process, because I think you always have things in layers,
Yeah.
so even things are, from past lives, even sometimes you're working on shadow stuff that, you brought in from this world, but it's not necessarily from this lifetime. But in the day-to-day, so you don't start kind of repacking it with what happens, is to really observe the difference between reaction and response. To understand that something can happen. I can't control what's going to happen to me, but I can control how I respond to it, and to really train myself that unless it's a fight or flight thing where I have to respond right away because I'm in danger, which is 99% of the time not true, do I have to react to someone telling me something that I don't want to hear, or do I have to react to somebody hurting my feelings? can I respond to it, and does it need a response first? And then is my response proportionate to what's going on there? And if I want to give a disproportionate response, to really ask myself why before justifying it. It's very easy when you're offended, or when your feelings are hurt, or when something comes up that just causes you to react, or you want to react to it, to kind of give into that and to feel that you're justified. But in the end, you're the only one who can kind of control you. It doesn't mean that person's not an ass. Doesn't mean that they haven't done something that is not acceptable. But there's a difference between losing your mind and saying, hey, that wasn't acceptable. I can't be in a relationship with you if you're going to treat me that way, is very different than fighting back and hitting back and trying to demean them. And I think for me, it's that reaction response was taught to me by one of my yoga teachers. And it's been so helpful in witchcraft as well, because as much as I love our witchcraft community, there's a lot of reaction. So the idea of wanting to, understand and kind of seed that idea to our community has been very, very important for me.
Absolutely. And that awareness is everything. That is something that, in people watching, that does not happen overnight. That awareness is a practice. That is definitely a practice. That's something we have to basically like stop, breathe, reprocess it before we react. And that is not easy to do, especially in a go, go, go kind of world.
Absolutely. And all the things we're talking about lay the foundation for that. So a lot of times people want to have spiritual mastery right away. Not that I think any of us really truly has mastery, but they want to be more masterful right away, but they can't journal 3 days, 3 pages a day. If you can't do that, then you're not going to really be able to pause to, determine your response versus your reaction. So everything builds upon everything else. Those are my love.
It's a commitment. It's a commitment. Let's see. So we have journaling and meditation, the ritual with the self, the shadow self, and kind of communicating and meeting and finding a common ground to work with each other. Are there any other ways to work with the shadow self? So aside from individualistic workings, is there anything out there that could help people on this journey, like Reiki healing or energy healing of any kind, or shaman work as well?
I think any type of work that helps integrate your consciousness is huge. I'd say the thing for me that was sort of the door to shadow work was flower essences. So I'm a huge believer in flower essences. I mentioned anger was kind of my key for it. And what started to give me that awareness, I was taking dandelion flower essence, which is for anger. And so the idea of, the green world, and I mean, not everyone's into the green world, so crystals as well, animal spirits, but anything that can help bring integration. But for me, corresponding the plant world with its plant spirits. So if you have a physical ailment and you think that physical ailment might be connected to some repressed emotions. So for me, I had liver problems. And in medicine, naturalistic medicine, the liver is associated with anger and processing hard emotions. So I went to a flower essence because I wasn't sick, but it was just like my tests were high and the doctors were concerned. So I was like, I need to get a handle on this before I get sick. And so I ended up going to a flower essence healer. And they gave me, and I didn't really talk a lot about what I did before they did their diagnosis. And they came up with all the liver herbs in flower essence form. And, once we started talking, they're like, yep, you might have an experience with anger. And I thought it would cure my anger. So I thought taking an essence was like an instant bright, chappy pill that they would just, be wonderful. And then after 3 days of being on the flower essence, I was really angry and I was really inappropriate with somebody. I started a new job and it was a volunteer job. So thankfully it wasn't my full-time income. But someone pushed my buttons and crossed a boundary. And again, that reaction versus response, I reacted. But it was good for the short term because at that point I was repressing everything. So sometimes when you're repressing everything, then you have to learn to react. Yeah. And then you can learn how to respond, but if you don't have at least that initial reaction, you're not gonna, you can't get to the end of the alphabet. You can't get to point Z without going through points, A through Y. So, to be gentle with yourself and to realize that every response isn't going to be perfect or a work in progress.
Yeah, and that's the difference between conventional and holistic too, is the whole idea behind holistic treatments is that it's the whole self, the whole body, not bandaging or masking symptoms. So of course essences would bring it out versus saying, oh, well, now I'm cured. And they're like, no, now I'm worse because it has to get worse to get better.
Right. Yeah, it was a healing crisis, absolutely. And shadow work can bring on that healing crisis, you know. A lot of times people hear this work and they're like, oh, I thought I was going to deal with my shadow. I feel worse than ever. I'm like, well, yeah, because you're in the middle of it. If you keep
Yeah,
with this process, you'll get to the other side of it, but you got to keep with the process.
yeah, because that shadow work is some serious hard truths, and what makes it harder is that pretty much we're doing it alone. Um, the whole point of it is to become intimate with ourselves and to face some truths. And some of these things we don't want to hear, we don't want to
Right.
talk about, we don't want to see, and we don't want to acknowledge that that's true. And I did this the beginning of this year. And for any of you who are my friends that are watching have probably saw this journey. Like I was diagnosed with cancer in 2018, and then I had to withdraw from the witchcraft one. Um, and like all this stuff just kept happening. I kept getting like really bad luck. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, like you need to just like smudge your entire life and stay in a hobbit hole and never see the sunlight ever again," because it just would not stop. And I'll be honest, like I was definitely a preacher of shadow work, but never really took the time to do it. So the beginning of this year, we hit something that probably could not be any worse to happen to our family. And that happened. So it forced me to go into inner work and to do shadow work. And I was like, I can't live like this anymore because it's like taking control of everything at this point. And I'm completely losing myself. I felt like I didn't even recognize who I am. And not even just like in interactions and everything, just in general, like I just did not feel right. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. That was something I said a lot. Um, and it sucked. I did the work. It was
Yeah.
not fun, but in doing that, I noticed a lot of things that I did were because of something else. And that was like the biggest turning point is that I've had all these habits that I've been diagnosed with OCD because of these habits, but they all were triggered and came about because of a past trauma. And it wasn't until I connected those two links that completely 180. I am very genuinely happy. Things are actually going very well. We have a very good series of good luck happening now. I feel brighter, lighter. My parenting is lighter. Like everything just feels better. And it wasn't until I had to face the worst of the worst and live with that change started happening. So I feel like I can tell people like, yeah, it's gonna suck, but it's so worth it. And I definitely think everybody should do it, whether they're practitioners or not. Just really getting to know themselves is everything. Everything.
Yep. I agree. It's the journey of the self, and I'm glad to hear all that. That's, although tough as it is, I think it's understanding our motivations behind things. I think is key for everything.
Um, Obviously, it's probably case by case basis, but what can someone expect in doing shadow work in terms of like a timeline? I know there's no timeline, but that's something that I know people have already asked me. I had messages because they knew we were doing this live tonight, and they said, "How long does shadow work take? Is it something like I can sit down and like do and like a session, or is it just Reiki and I like feel better?" Like, so we've already covered kind of like what to expect with that, but in terms of your own experience and my experience, like, and each shadow workings, because I know again you get better, then you do it again, and then it rebuilds, and you do it again and again. Um,
Right.
what can they expect for like how long? I mean, obviously it depends on how much they've suppressed, how much stuff they've been through. Um,
Right.
but is there an average in your line of work and working with students all the time? Have you seen a night and day difference with people? I know you do it for an entire year for year three. Um,
So that's actually a great point because we don't, although a lot of people say that. So for
yeah.
year three, the first 9 months are all the prep work. So we learn all these healing modalities, and then it's the last 3 months. So
Mm.
I'm a big believer in, if you're going to tackle this, particularly if you're ritualistic in some way, to set a ritual start and to plan a ritual end. And you're sort of declaring to yourself and your shadow, this is the time I can commit to this round. So we do a process of 3 months where the vast majority of those 3 months are the journaling exercises and the deeper healing to prepare you. And then it culminates in a ritual. And then pretty much when we set the date of the ritual, we'll say, we expect to close. It's almost like surgery, I think. Like you're opening yourself up, you're kind of exploring what needs to be there, but then you have to close yourself back up again to kind of function. And so that's why we kind of set a ritual start date and a ritual end date. I've had people do it over the course of a couple weeks. I've had people do the full 3 months. I think people working maybe one-on-one with me or one-on-one with a counselor of some sort or a healer of some sort might take many months to kind of go in, and they'll have kind of ups and downs to it. It won't be a clear-cut process, but I think for intensive ritual for someone who's ready for it, who's been a practitioner for a bit, I would say between the 4 weeks, a month to 3 months is a good range to set a start date and end date, depending on how you want to conjure it. So we do the journaling and the shamanic exercises, but you might be going to a therapist, or you might be doing, kind of more journaling work, or you might have other healing modalities and energy work and chakra work. So I would pick a model and then use the time period based on that model. So let's say if you wanted to explore the shadow in the chakras, you might do 7 weeks and really focus intensely on each of the chakras. Or if you're focused on like the 3 souls we talked about, you might do 3 weeks and focus each on one of the souls. But I think it's good, particularly if you're doing it on your own, to have that stop date and to have a very clear ritual end to it, and to try to reflect at that point, well, what did I learn from this process?
Yeah.
The biggest danger I found, just to warn people for it, are the people who are really gung-ho about it and they dive right into it and they start the process and they either get bored or scared and then they stop, and it's like you've opened yourself up, but then if you don't close yourself. So we often have people who quit in the school right around that period, which I'm thinking, wow, you made it to month 10 or 11, like you're gonna quit at this point, but if you want to quit, then it's up to you. But I actually give a ritual to quit, because I think a lot of times people, once they get to that point, they don't want a ritual to quit. But if they come back afterwards and say, I didn't do the ritual, and I feel really awful, and these are the things that are going on in my life because I kind of triggered the shadow, but I didn't make peace with it, I'd be like, here's the ritual to kind of put it back to bed. So when you're ready for it, you can go for it. So I think being prepared and having kind of a start and end date, at least for the first session, is good. And then once you've had a first connection to it, you might ask the shadow itself, and however you get answers, whether it be tarot or pendulum or just inner listening, and say, I'd really like to go deeper with you. How long should we do this work together? And the shadow may be like 2 weeks, or it might be 2 years or 2 months, or, and really listening to it and see what it wants to partner with you. Because I think as an entity itself, even though it's a part of you, it gets tired too. It's a lot for it to go through. It's not just us.
And you actually just brought up something that I was going to ask. So you mentioned tarot and pendulums. Are there any other tools that people, I mean, no one has to go out and buy anything, but if they already have things, or what tools do you think are helpful for somebody? Because maybe the normal modalities, or like the simplified ones, aren't their cup of tea, and maybe to keep them involved and to keep them interested and to keep going,
Yep.
maybe they would like tools to make it, I don't know, more fun, to say, for lack of better
Absolutely.
words.
I think in terms of tools, can be divided into tools that can give you information and that tools that can change your energy. So for the tools that can give you information, like it really depends on your own kind of symbology and how you connect to information. So if you're a tarot person, keep being a tarot person and ask the shadow to speak through the tarot. If you're about the runes, then use the runes, or whatever symbol system speaks to your soul, I think will also speak to the shadow. Although sometimes with shadow work, it's the thing you hate, it will come through because it's repressed,
Yeah.
right? So like I teach the pendulum because I think it's a basic tool and everything, but it's not my favorite. And earlier on in my career, I just didn't have really great luck with the pendulum. I wouldn't say I hated it, but I didn't like it. So when I was doing first rounds of shadow work, the pendulum was how the shadow wanted to speak to me. So I had to kind of face something I wasn't good at every time it wanted to be good at it. So look at
But
the
that's
things
not
that
one way to teach patience.
yeah, absolutely. And just to like recognize like nothing's inherently good or bad, and look how we label something based on how good we are at it. Like, oh, I wasn't great at it, I'm good at all these other things, why can't you pick the thing that's easy for me? Nope, it's going to make it hard. And then the other tools, things that will help change your energy or keep your focus on the intention, like all the dark stones are super great to work
Yeah.
with this. So if you're the type that likes to carry a talisman in your pocket, look at obsidian, look at
Hmm.
shungite, look at numite, look at jet, look at our frednazite. There's a bunch of new dark stones out there that are really about kind of reflecting on things. And I think they're pretty awesome. But even just simple obsidian or onyx,
Yeah.
are great go-tos, and jet, great go-to for it. And then, I said flower essences before. The ritual of taking something every day has been very helpful for me. So I
Mhm.
recommend students take probably the preeminent shadow flower essence is black-eyed Susan. So it's this bright yellow, orange yellow flower with a dark center to it. It's like you can't avoid the shadow with it. And when you take the flower essence of it, it's really about bringing up whatever you think you've repressed into the shadow, and kind of bringing it out to the light to look at it. So I think it can be very helpful for that type of work.
I keep, I keep thinking of something, and then but I'm listening to you, and then I'm like gone. Um, it wasn't tarot, but it was, I don't know. I don't remember. It was definitely about tools. Um, Actually, while I'm not thinking, I wanted to know if anyone had any questions because I've been seeing some comments, but again, like I don't know if you can see the comments, but I only see two at a time on the mobile. So,
Yeah, they flash by really quickly. So by the time I start to read them, they've gone by.
so I see a lot of people talking about it. Personal experience. What about being scared about finding out about your shadow self? That's from Casey Ann.
Well, that is one of the key shadow emotions, fear, isn't it? And it makes total sense, and I totally get that. I get that's why a lot of people will not want to do it because it's fearful. But I think that's really why it's important to dive right into it, because I think ultimately, if we're going to kind of look at the most primal emotions, there's teachings that say everything can be divided into fear and love. And I know that seems trite, but I think there's a certain amount of truth to it.
Oh yeah.
There's either
Yeah.
things that expand us or there's things that contract us. I know that my anger, underneath that was fear. So if you're already at the place where you recognize that it's fear, then, go towards the fear. And I think it can never be worse than not knowing. I think constantly hanging it over your head to think, how I'm afraid so I can't go forward. I think once you start to face it, you might realize it's not as bad as you anticipated it being, but I think
Yeah.
you have to dive into it.
And this is what I remember now before I lose it again. So in doing shadow work, something that I've noticed, and I've actually heard this from others as well, especially the people, friends of mine that are in W3, they said towards the end of it too, they're noticing that their relationships are getting better. And I think that that has to do with being open and honest with ourselves. We can now do the whole namaste. Like I recognize that in you now, like we're
Mm-hmm.
all going through something. I think like that awareness helps us be aware of other people going through things, which inherently just makes us feel better and it makes everything seem better because we're able to understand a lot better. I keep saying the word better, but it really does. And I've noticed like my patience got better. I was always a very patient person, but my patience got even better. I've noticed that my communication and understanding and empathy like skills have gotten stronger from just releasing that part of me. And I don't know if that has to do with me just healing myself or that is because of the like learning to understand myself, which means everybody has this aspect to themselves.
I think it, ultimately also gives us compassion for both ourselves and for other people. For us and the Temple of Witchcraft Mystery School, we, associate this degree with water because it's so emotional. But I think the highest virtue of water is compassion, which is not necessarily sympathy. It's more of that empathy. Can I identify where someone's coming from? Because I've identified where I'm coming from. So
Yeah.
when you're dealing with friends and family and, you can have that little bit more patience because you realize, okay, the way they're speaking to me before I'd react. And now I can take a moment and think, oh, they're probably speaking to me that way because they're having a bad day. If they
Hmm.
cross a line, I've got to say something, but I'm not gonna get personally upset for something that I can recognize now has nothing to do with me. And I can kind
Yeah.
of hold that space and say, yep, you're having a bad day. I'm having a bad day too. Or, you're having a bad day today. I'll have a bad day another day, and you're gonna have to hold space for me. But it is that level of patience for what's happening for other people. And I think we all need that both in our families and out in the world.
Absolutely. And then Amy says, well, this is the whole question, but I think we could narrow it down, but it's what are some good tarot oracle decks that can be used for shadow work, and should we maybe have a deck solely dedicated to shadow work? My answer to that would be that's a personal preference. Whatever one you seem to be working with, whatever one works for you, I think that would be the good tarot deck or oracle deck. They do have like dark themed. I do have a dark themed oracle deck that I use for shadow readings and everything. As far as the other part of it, should we have this deck solely to that? Again, I think that's up to you. I would, just because you have that energy connection with it, so you can always set it aside when you close yourself back up. And then when you're ready to go again, you have that deck to go back to. And that way you don't have to keep cleansing it, especially if you read for other people. You don't want to have to keep cleansing. Like, you don't want this all up in your readings, trust me.
Right. I think also looking for the deck that you may have an aversion to. You know, would be helpful with shadow work stuff. And I know I kind of keep going back to that, but you know, there's also this assumption with shadow work that it's going to be a dark deck, you know, but if you have an aversion to something because you can't identify with it, it might be a cutesy deck. It might be your Hello Kitty deck, you know, it might be something like that where you're like, this is so not me and I so don't identify with it, but it's going to give me the message I don't want to hear, but I need to hear.
I keep getting the freaking rainbow. Oh, I must be angry.
And I think sometimes we identify so much with the kind of archetypal witch, and there's so many other decks and so many other mythologies out there. And I think sometimes if we're forced to look at things that are outside of our usual comfort zone or expectation, I think it triggers the shadow.
Yes, absolutely. Balancing life and, oh, that was something I was going to ask earlier, but Gypsy Waters says, balancing life and school, work and shadow work, how do we balance it all? And also to add to that, what I was going to ask earlier is people, I hear this all the time, doesn't have to do with shadow work, but just in general, I don't have time.
Yep.
I don't have time for meditation. I don't have time for yoga. I don't have time for me time, parents. I don't have time to take a shower. My kid's in the bathroom with me. And you hear everything. So how can time management, how do they balance it all?
Well, I think pre-shadow work, it's you have to make the decision that you want it, and anything you want takes time and energy for. And I think if you take a really good stock and inventory of how you spend your time and energy, you'll realize there's ways and places that you waste it and don't make the best life choices and decisions, where you could then make different choices and apply it to the things you say you want but haven't made time for. And I think sometimes people say they want things, but they don't really want them, and that's fine, you know, but then I think part of the shadow work is owning up to the fact of like, oh, I want to do all this work, but I don't really want to make the time for it. So that's part of the shadow too, you know, and to have compassion for yourself and say, maybe this is not the time of my life to do this, you know, or maybe I need to rearrange things. When you're heading into shadow work though, I love the premise of the question, because I'm going to disagree with the premise of the question totally. I don't think you can keep balance. So I think the whole purpose of doing shadow work is purposeful unbalancing to get to the shadow. So I think you've got to create a container and a set amount of time of, you know, and I talked about that before, about setting, you know, weeks or months or whatever it may be. But I think it has to have a beginning, middle, and end to it, because I think you can't constantly live unbalanced. And I think people who really are in love with the shadow work and can't let it go, they live a very unbalanced life. But I think, you know, you're climbing the mountain at some points and you have to reach a plateau, you know, and you've got to reach the plateau. So I think making peace with the fact that if you're diving into shadow work or you're diving in any type of intensive, deep magical training, it's going to change you, and change is unbalancing, and change is not easy. And I think if you're thinking, I need to keep my my life perfectly the way it is right now, but I also want to do this other thing, you shouldn't choose magic, because magic changes you.
Your life's not going to be the way it was.
Exactly. And I think if you're going to be unhappy that it changes, then you should just be happy with your life as it is and not make that change.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle Pierce says, and this question came up like 3 times already tonight, but we can come full circle. What is the best way to get started? So I know we kind of had like a little bullet point. So we went out of order, but I think we've kind of made an order. So let's just put it all bullet listed right now. So it sounds like first things first is to create the will to want to do it, first of all. And then second would be creating a start and end date. And then I'll have you add the...
Sure. So the way I teach it, which is not the only way to do it, but the way I teach it, is we do some pretty intensive journaling around what I call the shadow emotions. So we look at anger, fear, jealousy, shame, and I encourage the students to pick a fifth category that's whatever trigger word that's specific to them.
Mhm.
So some students have said, I'm not really a jealous person. I'm like, well, keep it just in case, because you might be and not realize it. But if not a lot of jealousy stuff comes up, then pick another word that, triggers you. And then when we look at those columns, just to kind of bullet point what's on your mind when anger comes up, when fear comes up, what makes you angry, what makes you afraid, what makes you shameful, what makes you jealous, what makes you revolted, whatever it may come up for you. And do that pretty intensely, and every day, make a page of it and then turn the page and don't look back. Let it go for that time and let it kind of conjure and churn and build up. And then the way I teach it for, again, this is a third-year program, so if you're not experienced with a lot of stuff, I'm not saying jump into it in this way. But we then burn the journal. And after burning the journal and turning it to ash, we add water to it, usually in a cauldron. And so it becomes this black scrying pool. And we meditate into the scrying pool. We ask the shadow to make itself known. So we kind of gaze at our face in the dark reflection, and maybe our face changes a bit and we start to talk to a darker view of ourselves. Or we do shamanic journey and drumming work and rattling work. And we go into the other world, into the underworld, to commune with the shadow. But we make an actual concerted effort to connect with the entity that is the shadow and find a way to communicate with it. Some shadows will speak to us verbally. Some shadows will show us things. Some shadows will make us feel things. And you have to figure out your shadow language with it. How are you going to communicate with this part of yourself? And what does it want? Does it want an apology? Does it want an explanation? Does it want to just simply hear you love it? What does it want? And then give it what it wants, as long as it's not harmful to you or harmful to other people. And then going forward, what's the agreement? How can you not show it disrespect? How can you not make it bear a burden? What does it want? The shadow might specifically tell you, like when you're going to be angry, I want you to do this. And that'll be a very specific thing that you can partner with. But and then come out of that ritual, and then that ritual capstone is like the ceiling at the end of that process. But then be willing to go through it again, because years from now you might be like, oh, I'm really feeling more things are coming up I wasn't aware of. I've got to go through that process again.
Uh, Actually, I just thought of something. No one's asked this yet, and we've never even mentioned this at all. But my viewers are all over the spectrum in terms of age. So do you have a recommendation for ages? I know, I started young, in the craft. But do you think that this is kind of like an age appropriate type of working, or can someone who's 14, 13, or younger think about this? I know it's hard to think of like a 9 or 10-year-old even considering
Right.
anything like that. But there's some of them very above their age. They've also been doing practicing. Maybe they were brought up in a family around it. So where do you stand on aging for shadow
I
work?
think when you're young, even if you're pretty old for your age, I think you're still kind of forming a lot of these parts of yourself.
Yeah,
So I would say and not to say, teens don't go through their own shadow work. They absolutely do. But I think if it's at all possible, if you're not into full adulthood, and even if you are into full adulthood, if you don't have mentorship and support in some way, to work with somebody who can do that with clear boundaries. So it's not necessarily your best friend, it's not necessarily your parent that's going to help you with this, but someone who can help you objectively, whether that be a therapist. A lot of therapists are very open to things, whether it be another type of energy healer that you go to, or a witchcraft mentor or something. But to have somebody who can kind of spot check you and help you with that process and help you get out if you had some difficulties with it. I've been very lucky. I had a mentor pretty early on. I mean, these days, I guess it'd be late, but I got into this around 18, 19, and I had a mentor who I was very close with that got me through those first stages. So I think that's always super helpful. I think if you have a lot of trauma in your past, if you have a lot of injury, abuse, things that you're conscious of already, and I realize a lot of people, could have a lot of things they're not conscious of, but if you're conscious of it, I think it's really important to work with somebody who's qualified.
yeah,
I find that working with healing practitioners, but particularly therapists, psychotherapists, are very open. If you can, many of them are much more open to witchcraft than we would assume them to be these days. But even if you can kind of couch it in Jungian terms of the shadow, but like wanting to ritualize it, wanting to make it artistic, wanting to do that. A lot of therapists will meet you. I've had so many students in my classes be therapists, and they can't quite say the witchcraft words out in their professional context all the time. Some of them do, though. But a lot of them feel like they can really work with it. There's an interesting therapy that's out there right now called family systems therapy, and it works with a lot of the parts of the self, and it uses a psychological model, but when you look at it, it's so magical, it's so shamanic. They just take that word out, you know? So I think having that type of support's important, but I think whether you're young and you don't have a lot of support in your life, or if you're an adult and you've had a lot of abuse in your life, it's really important to have some type of check-in and some type of support if you want to go deep in this process.
Especially because it can become difficult to deal with. So if you get stuck in the middle of it, you need someone to help you come back to center and pull you out of that, because you can see people spiral. I've seen this happen. It just gets caught in the feelings, and then that becomes their new norm, and that's, you know, you see that in diagnosis and everything, which brings me to probably our last question. I don't even know what time it is. All right, yeah. So this is something that you have as a question for your students who want to enroll in your School of Witchcraft. If you have a predisposed or a diagnosis of a mental illness or anything of that kind, do you have any recommendations for someone who is feeling suicidal or has like severe depression or severe bipolar or any other schizophrenia, mental health conditions? Do you have any advice for them who want to do shadow work? Is there something that should that be treated differently, or they, you know?
Well, I think it's more serious to the extent of all the things we've already talked about. I think people are people no matter what diagnosis they have, but I think if you do have a diagnosis, I think it's really important to have that support. We have that question in all our questionnaires for any of our long-term or degree classes, because we want to know the person who's going into it has support. And honestly, that question has come up as part of the application, because I've had people, I've not explicitly asked it, but in conversations and interviews with students when the school was much smaller and it was very one-on-one type of experience, people have hidden things from me, where I'm like, wow, that would have been really helpful for me to know to help you navigate this if I knew you had X, Y, or Z. And then it also we actually ask for emergency contact information as well, because we've had some situations where people have gotten really deep in their feelings, and it would have been really nice to do a wellness check and to check in with a family member or somebody they live with and be like, I really think you need to take this person someplace, you know, to get evaluated. And not that that happens often, but I rather have people be safe.
Of course.
You know, and so and at no point, if someone answers yes to those questions in the application, are they disqualified from taking classes. But the follow-up with it always is, well, what's your support? And is your family open to taking these types of classes? And do you have a network of support? Do you have a support of a doctor? I've done amazing work with people who've had really open and supportive psychiatrists and psychologists and psychopharmacologists. There's a lot out there that can be complementary with witchcraft, but if someone is in severe depression, I don't want to necessarily feel that the witch is the best person to treat all aspects of that. So I want to make sure they have a team of support, you know, but that's why we ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you have any, besides your own, or you can, you know, list your own as well, any recommended books on the topic? Or so, okay, so say someone's never done your classes at all, it didn't go to the Temple of Witchcraft, didn't do one or two, could they buy your third year book and jump in, or do you recommend them starting from the beginning?
It depends on what previous experience they have. Each of the books are written from that perspective of, you know, you maybe have just picked it up, but the book that we do the shadow work in, the third year book, is called The Temple of Shamanic Witchcraft. And if you've had a lot of experience in Wicca, witchcraft, magic, paganism, and you feel like you're looking for something a little bit more intermediate, I've had a lot of people just pick it up and do really well with it. If this is all brand new to you and you've never meditated, you've never done any type of ceremony, you don't have contact with your spirit guides, then I'd probably start with the Inner Temple of Witchcraft. So those are things to kind of look to. Other than that book, there's a lot more that's coming out about shadow work, and it's even some of the most recent stuff that's out there I probably haven't read yet. But I'm a big fan of The Kimberly Sherman Cook wrote a book on shadow work called In the Shadow of 13 Moons, which I thought was really good. It's not a well-known book, but I think it's a good book for really kind of doing some shadow work in the lunar cycle, which I think is sometimes a helpful way of kind of framing things. That's not something I've really talked about a lot, but kind of doing dark moon mystery stuff. Timothy Roderick's work, he's done a lot with shadow, and he's done a lot with relationship with power, and I highly recommend all his books. And if you're looking for kind of a beginner book for things, and it's not a super beginner book, but he's got books that take you through a year and a day, through like kind of a witch's calendar, and those are really great too. And he's got another book called Apprentice to Power, and he's got a book on shadow work as well, so I highly recommend those. And I think those are some good places to start, you know.
And then we're gonna end it with do you have your website or your link for where people could utilize your services? And also, are you doing anything during COVID? Are online classes still happening? I know this answer, but are classes still happening? Can you enroll online? Do you offer any energy work over, long distance?
Sure. Yep. So pretty much my whole schedule and the Temple of Witchcraft schedule for the New Hampshire branch, even though there may be differences like for our Canadian students or people over in Europe, or pretty much you can guarantee until the new year is online. So everything we've can convert to, we've converted to online into Zoom, and we just did our big festival, Temple Fest, and it was all over Zoom just because we want people to be safe. So if you want my individual classes, and I'm teaching at different shops and stores, but all online at this point, but it's a way to help support our shops and stores and our community, even if we can't go see them, is to take some of the online classes. So that can be found at christopherpenczak.com. And then all my temple work, including our mystery school classes we've talked a lot about, can be found on templeofwitchcraft.org. If you sign up for the mailing list there or follow us on our social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But our mystery school is currently online closed for registration, but it's going to be opening in October. And when it opens in October, the classes will start in March of 2021. So there's a whole application process, and just because you apply doesn't mean everybody gets in. We try to welcome as many people as we can, but we also try to make it so we can give individual time to every student needs it. Everybody gets a mentor and all that. And all our Sabbats, all our moon rituals, my own rituals, and we're trying to do a combination of our traditional kind of full business classes with some things that are donation only, and even doing some free stuff. Like last night, I just did a free meditation for the Temple of Witchcraft, but it was open to anybody, and the link was just posted. I'm doing some Facebook Live stuff based on the elements. I think the next one's going to be in October or November. I think October, on the waters of the world. And there's going to be another one on the element of air in December. So you can look to our Temple of Witchcraft Facebook page for those events. So we're really trying to support people as much as we can. At the moment, I'm not seeing a lot of private clients for readings and for healing work unless they're already involved in the community. Although if someone puts in a request, I'll always consider a request, and you can put in a request at christopherpenczak.com. So I'll see private clients as needed, but for the most part, I tend to focus on students and teaching these days.
So for the private clients, do you mean for local in person or still remaining online?
Right now, I'm still doing everything online. So I'll do a reading for if a client wants to have a session with me, I'll do it online. Or if you want to do distant healing or flower essence consultant or something like that, I'll send out a flower essence to you.
Okay, good. And I saw that you had some stuff for sale not too long ago. Is that just for your Facebook friends, or is that something that they can see online as well?
Pretty much I've got a web store on christopherpenczak.com, and the temple has a web store on templeofwitchcraft.org. And if it's a unique product on christopherpenczak.com, I've made it, so I usually make some specific products based on what's blooming right now, and once it's out, it's out. So I think a lot of the unique products are gone, but all my books are for sale on my website, on the temple website. So you can check that out. And my partner, Adam, actually runs our apothecary here. So between him and me, we harvest a lot of the herbs, and we, make a lot of the unique products that show up on both shops.
You had a good year with that this year, huh? I've been following all the photos, yeah.
Yeah, we've been harvesting a lot. We haven't made a lot. We're still drying a bunch of stuff. I ended up processing wormwood this morning. I'm doing a big class on wormwood, so got a big bowl of wormwood I need to kind of start making stuff with. But yep, we got some good stuff. Ooh, very cool.
It's a wormwood.
Very nice. Yeah.
My
Yeah,
herb.
very beautiful herb, powerful ally.
Very good. All right, so I think we are going to wrap it up. We've had you for an hour, and
Well,
I
thank
thank
you
you
so much
so
for
much
having
for
me
your
on.
time. I've seen a lot of comments. I hope you read the comments later because I noticed a lot of people were saying thank you so much for offering this live video. Can you guys recommend some therapists like that, maybe video wise, since I'm sure they don't love where I am? I guess that would have to be something we would have to look up online for your local area.
Yeah, I think it's always good to look locally and just, ask them how open they are to alternative religions and things like that is usually my first question when I seek out a therapist.
Mhm.
And if they say they're Christian based, and not that you can't be a wonderful therapist as a Christian based, but if that's the first thing they tell you, I'm like, oh, maybe not for me. But if they say they're Jungian, or if they say they're open to alternative spiritualities or alternative lifestyles, then they
Yeah,
tend to be pretty liberal and open. So I think most people
absolutely.
can find things somewhere in their area, and hopefully their insurance will accept it.
You can always check through your insurance to find local providers, and then do not hesitate to ask them questions because you are interviewing someone who you're going to be spending a lot of intimate time with. So don't just settle for the first available. If they're not taking
Right.
patients, like keep looking, keep asking, ask questions because this is a very important thing. My daughter and I have gone through therapists, and something that she struggled with was I don't like this one, I don't like this one. So now we do like, all right, we're going to interview this one. If you don't feel connected, then we're not going to bother. It's
Right.
about finding that right. Thank you again for your time from Casey Ann. Trying to do a 13-month Hecate course in shadow work. Is this something that I should be doing together?
Um, I think it depends on relationships. I think, whatever you feel comfortable with. If the support of doing it together is helpful for you, or if you feel like it's more of a solo journey, I think that's an individual question to answer. I did a lot
I
of shadow
think
work with
doing
my mother, so it depends on the relationships and connections you have.
and I think doing a 13-month Hecate course with shadow work at the same time might be a lot. So I guess
Yeah, I
it's
think
all your
yeah, I guess it depends on how the course is run. So I mean, I think
yeah.
Hecate is a great ally for, shadow work and
Shadow.
shining the torch
Yeah,
into the darkness. So I guess it just depends on what the structure is.
absolutely. Alrighty, so I think that's it. That's as much as I'm going to scroll without shaking the phone
Okay.
for 20 minutes.
Well,
Thank you again
thank you
for
so
being
much.
here. Thank you. And I will talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you soon. You take care and good luck with everything. Blessed be.
You too. Thank you. Blessed be.